So, I was thinking about it, and what I would really like is to explore cutthroat power politics in Renaissance Venice in a campaign.
Right. So everyone's a bard. That works. Okay, roll up. We don't know what we're doing.
We don't know what we're doing.
When do we ever know what we're doing? We're just trying to be silly on the internet.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to GeekQuery. I am the Gneech.
And I am InkBlitz. And this week we are talking about modding D&D.
Yep.
A lot of people will say that D&D is kind of a specialized fantasy, high fantasy sort of game, but what if it's not? Like, what if it's something you could really mod instead of take something you can use as a basis instead of saying that, yes, this is high fantasy. Instead, what if you could turn it into sci-fi? What if you can turn it into mystery? What can you could turn it into Greek gods?
Yeah, well, almost as long as role-playing games have been around, there's been the concept of the universal role-playing system. There was GURPS, there was Hero System, there was all these other things.
The D20 is kind of a universal.
Yep, and third edition really leaned into that when they did the open gaming license. They opened up the D20 system, and that was intended to create adventures for D&D. And what people did instead was like, oh, we can use this as the new free universal open source role playing game. And
we can use this for anything. Why not?
Yeah, and D&D, even with fifth edition, they've kind of leaned into this. Still, they've got Ravenloft is the D&D as a horror game, and they've got Odysseys of Theros, which is D&D as the Greek gods, and all these other things. So they are leaning into that.
Yeah, they brought in like a lot of Magic the Gathering things as well. Like Ravnica is the giant city, planet city actually, from Magic the Gathering, and so it really kind of gives more of a feeling that D&D, at least fifth edition, is more of a guideline. It's more of a baseline instead. It's a toolkit instead of being the high fantasy that people assume it should be. And to be fair, I mean, there's a lot of things in 5e where, yeah, it is high fantasy as heck, and it's really, really, really hard to change that. But
yeah, you'll often hear people talking about, well, if you want a sci-fi game, you should be playing a sci-fi game.
You should be playing Shadowrun. Why are you playing D&D?
Yeah, or whatever. So we're going to talk about using D&D this way and sort of kit bashing it into other stuff. And so there's some pros and cons about this. Why would you want to do this? Well, pros, everybody knows D&D.
Yes.
We've said before, it's everybody's first role-playing system, and it's the most popular one. And there's a lot to draw from,
If you say you're going to play Dungeons and Dragons, or you're going to say we're going to play a modern Dungeons and Dragons, or say we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons in space, people know kind of what they're getting into. Like, they know at least the system that they're going to try and play. You may be kit bashing into something else, but at the same time, they still have a basic understanding of what is expected.
Yeah, almost every gamer in the world understands armor class, understands hit points, understands ability scores and skill checks and all that jazz.
And fifth edition is so old now, like it's going into 5-6 years or older, that there's a lot of resources to draw from.
Yep. Yeah, there's the WotC stuff. There's Xanathar's Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is a terrific resource for doing things that are outside the normal box of D&D.
And there's a lot of third-party things as well. DMG, Dungeon Masters Guild.
Roll20, utilities, random generators all over the internet.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And as a rule set, 5e is a very good rule set. Once you understand it, it's you can break it like any other kind of rule set, but if you know how it works and understand the math behind it and why it's +0 to +6 and all this other stuff, it's very fun, it's very fast, very flexible. It's got lots of parts that you can tweak.
And that's really what makes it a good thing to mod, because it is so flexible. There are things you can just easily take things out and add things in, and it's not going to fall apart in your lap.
And of course, there's cons, but the first one that comes to mind, and it was a problem in the D20 era too, is the crazy power scaling.
Yes.
You hear about 0 to hero. D&D is from 0 to demigod.
Yes.
Right. A fifth level character is very different from a first level character. A 10th level character is very different from a fifth level character. A 20th level character is unrecognizable to any of them, right? So that's a thing that you're gonna have to deal with.
And you know, it's difficult. Like a lot of people never get past the first 5 levels, or you know, the first 10 levels. So you never really experience what it's like beyond that.
Yeah.
So
and it does play differently at higher levels.
Yeah, it's definitely played differently. And it goes from, you know, you're a mercenary to you are a demigod. You are meeting demigods or gods at you know, 15 to 20 level usually.
And you know, there's the genre and mechanics mismatch issue. You know, if you can just pull out a sword and kill Cthulhu, Cthulhu's not that scary.
It's not that scary, and I'm pretty sure that people have killed Cthulhu in D&D campaigns.
Probably so, and you know, there's a in the D20 Cthulhu that WotC put out, there's a picture of a regular D&D party just getting curb stomped by Cthulhu, and it's hilarious. But at the same time, it's not unreasonable to think that a D&D party, 15th, 16th level D&D party, might not take on Cthulhu and might not win. So
if you stat it, people will find a way to kill it.
Yep. Yeah. And the other sort of big con is just everybody's played D&D. You're sort of stuck in the D&D rule set. If you take on a game that has armor class and hit points and all these things, then you're going to be in this mode of combat encounters, social encounters, exploration encounters that the rule set is designed to work with. And if you want something that's different from that, it can be a little difficult to graft it on. You know, if you wanted to play a game that was like Gumshoe, right, it would be very difficult to do that as a D&D campaign.
You could, but it'd be difficult.
Yeah. So when you are looking to reskin things, you have to sort of do things that are a match. You know, the Star Wars, the D20 Star Wars game worked because Star Wars is very action heavy kind of thing. A D20 Star Trek might be a little trickier. So
you could, but you know, you'd basically be taking out spells. And you know how much people really rely on the spells in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. So, but assuming that you've decided that D&D, reskinning D&D is what you want to do,
and we have,
you know, yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. But what do you need to look at when you're doing that? Well, like we said, power scaling is crazy, and you have to look at levels. So,
what is your power level going to be like? Not just you know, your levels, your the numbered levels. What kind of power level are you looking for? Like, are you going for supers, like really, really powerful beings? You go for 10th level. Yeah. Like if you want to start out as Iron Man, or you want to start out as, you know,
Blitz's brain broke.
But it's just you just saw it right there. Just
Yeah. So yes, if you wanted to play a supers game, you'd probably start around 10th level. If you wanted a game that was everybody is very mortal, you know, like a classic sword and sorcery game, you know, you'd probably do something like the E6 variant for D20, where 6th level is where everybody stops.
Yeah.
You know, there are ways to get around that, but that's the kind of your first, you know, where to go with that.
That would also be really good. And E6 would probably be good for, like, if you actually want to try a Star Trek game. Most of the people in Star Trek are extremely low powered. Like, for example, Worf is probably 3rd level fighter, 4th level fighter, maybe. He's not going to get much more powerful. Yeah. But and none of them are. And the Borg are probably 10th level enemies.
Yeah, the things you have to think about is, you know, what's right for the genre. So, you know, I like to use the concept of oops, all humans for, you know, a normal setting, you know, a Conan setting or something like that. Middle Earth is almost all humans, right? So, you know, you're going to need to create limitations.
Or it could be the opposite. Like if you are going into sci-fi, maybe there are no humans. Maybe humans are a rarity, or they are not actually humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I mean, it depends on the nature of your campaign. You could do everybody's a droid. You could do all kinds of crazy stuff. The other thing is if you're creating a realistic realistic world, you know, you're going to have a lot of fighters and rogues, right?
Yes.
Because
yeah,
they're the non-magical classes.
Which doesn't exist. We're all fighters. We're all rogues of some sort. There is.
Yeah, the closest thing you've got to a party healer is the battle master or the rogue who can pull out a medikit with the bonus action, right? So, and you know, it's actually kind of surprising how effective a rogue with a medikit can be, but.
Stealth into the battlefield with a medikit, killing people while bullets are flying overhead. No one even knows I'm here.
But you're going to need something to deal with the sort of expected functionality that comes with spells. You know, whether it's gear or
because
psychic powers.
Like if you're going for a technological version of D&D or a sci-fi version of Dungeons and Dragons. Spells are integral. Like the game assumes you are going to have spells or something similar to spells or magical weapons or mystical supernatural abilities of some sort.
Yes.
How do you work that in?
Yes. The game is scaled assuming that a 5th level somebody can cast a fireball, and you have to have that, you know, you have to have that or the math gets weird. So where do you get that? Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about reskinning. That's kind of one of our big themes on this channel. So reskin all the things. We
all
really
of them. We love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, we mentioned before Spock is a half elf, right?
Basically,
so there's you use this whole concept as your foundational principle.
Nietzsche's brain broke.
You can have Jedi warlocks. You can have spells as gadgets, and spells as gadgets is a big one that we're doing in my space opera game.
Yeah, so in our space opera game, I have the character of Lux, and she is a bard. The bards, of course, naturally have spells, and you really need to have some way to turn that into technology, because spells as magic do not exist in our campaign. And instead, what Lux has is a hologram system all along her feathers and her tail, which produces various sorts of illusions or mind-altering effects. And so far, I've used it directly for minor illusion or silent illusion, which is just a hologram. You're creating a holographic image on something.
Yeah. And we've reskinned healing potions as being, you know, the stim pack. You know, the little green vial that and you feel better. And I'm going to be introducing, as the campaign goes on, I'm going to be introducing magic items reskinned as technological gadgets.
I'm excited for that.
Yeah, like the party in the last game I ran, the party found a little rod, kind of looks like a sonic screwdriver.
We have no idea what it
does. You know, I already know it is a magic item from D&D, just lifted and plopped in.
Killers.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what it is,
Aww.
but you'll find out when we run again. But yep, the point is that this is where you go with this kind of thinking is the quick and easy route to make something that plays like D&D, where the math works, etc., is you just take what D&D gives you and you change the flavor text, really, and maybe some of the mechanics. Like we've altered the mechanics in my game. We've altered the mechanics of weapons, so the weapons do a little more damage than the D&D baseline. Behind the scenes, in order to adjust for that, I have tweak the numbers of challenge ratings so that the hit points and damage range that creatures do is modified to affect this and things like that.
It's a lot more deadly.
Yeah, it is a little more swingy. It's a little more sort of rocket taggy.
But on the spells as gadgets, one way to think about it is Boba Fett, where you know, as he's an Eldritch Knight basically, who's kitted out with different various sorts of gadgets. His rocket pack, his missile launchers. Those are spells, but they are basically gadgets.
Yep.
Or you can use spells as superpowers.
Yeah. again, going back to our campaign as a model, because this is where we're really putting this stuff into practice. Lee's characters, the mind controlling psionic guy, he's also a bard, but he's specializing in like charm spells and all that jazz. You've got here super soldier serum, which I hadn't even thought about, but is brilliant.
Captain America.
Yeah, it's absolutely, what are these crazy abilities? Well, he's got all these
soldier
amazing powers. He's got this amazing durability, etc.
It's kind of like one of another character is a man who is stuck in a suit. It's same sort of similar thing. It's a superpower, superpowered suit that he is permanently stuck into. He's an artificer.
He's an armorer artificer,
and it works really well.
Yeah.
One thing also to consider that we've really been bouncing off back and forth about so far is also attunement, because attunement is important when it comes to giving people magic items. It prevents people from becoming just massively overpowered, or passing off an item to someone else and letting them use it randomly. That can also be reskinned. I don't think we've actually come to an agreement on that yet, but one of my suggestions was have these items be powered, like have technological items need a power supply, and it's a universal power supply that people carry on them to power these magical items.
Well, I mean,
not magical, but
yeah, this is something that's going to be different for every campaign. And in my particular campaign, everything I've been doing, I've been sort of passing on to the player. This is what's required. You come up with something that makes sense. And so far, the players have really stepped up.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with how we've come so far. This is a really great example of the players helping the DM.
Yeah,
players help your DM. Come up with things.
Yeah. So for attunement, I'm just like, you know what? It requires attunement. You figure out why. So if it's a technological doodad, it could be that they're all plugged into the same battery, or it could be, they have fields that interfere with each other.
That's good too.
Like
electromagnetic fields.
Yeah. Your shield that requires attunement prevents you from shooting your weapon that requires attunement because you just hit the inside of the shield or whatever. Pick something.
Yeah,
right?
it's something. It has to be something that prevents you from having more than 3 magical items.
Yeah. And in D&D, the language is that the attunement is like your maximum connection to the outside things, and artificers get an extra. Yeah. But rules wise, the reason attunement is there is to keep people from becoming Christmas trees, to prevent the 30 era, do all the buffs all the time.
Do everything at once.
Yeah. So you can't just throw it away. You have to come up with a reason for these rules to make sense in the setting. But that just leads into like what mechanical changes can you make, should you make, for your game to make sense. And we've talked before again about how D&D is so super modular. There's lots of variant rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide for running different styles of game.
Yeah.
And these are worth looking at.
Yes.
A quick, easy way to change the flavor of your campaign very dramatically is by changing how long rests work. And for a realistic game, if you want a gritty survival game, make your long rests require 24 hours.
Yes.
I think a short rest is 8 hours or whatever.
I think that's considered the meat grinder mode.
Well, a meat grinder is a term they use in Tomb of Annihilation, but that was talking about death saves. But point is, that's a much more punishing sort of game than one where you can just sleep 8 hours and everybody's fresh as a daisy.
That also brings up another point too. Death saves. If someone, maybe you can set it so if you really want it to be difficult, if someone drops to 0, or you can add negatives again, negative HP if you really wanted to, and make it really gritty realism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Get rid of death saves. Don't do that, though.
I don't recommend that, but you can tweak how they work. You can tweak, what's a success, what's a failure, etc. We're running a very heroic game, so we don't really want to mess with the death saves too much, but You could make them a lot more punishing. But again, going back to genre, and the Dungeon Master's Guide has a sanity system to emulate that sort of Call of Cthulhu.
Wait, it
horror.
does? I need to read the DMG again.
Yeah, it's got all kinds of stuff. And you can also just lift mechanics from other systems. 5e is very flexible. I'm including in my game. I'm including a variation of the Traveler shipbuilding and rules for ship customization and stuff like that.
I am so looking forward to this.
Yeah, and I've sort of made a combination of the Traveler shipbuilding rules and the Star Wars Saga Edition ship combat to try and get something that plays like D&D, but still has that kind of flexibility. If you like Gumshoe, I brought up Gumshoe before. It's very different from D&D. It's completely investigation. It's talking and being motivated by your characters, basically your character's biffs in 5e, but they call them something else in Gumshoe. But you could lift that sort of thing. That people can do, bidding games to have successes at skills instead of rolling the d20 or whatever. You want to look at ways to integrate it back into whatever system you're using, but you can do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, like if you need more computers things, you can go into Shadowrun and bring out hackers from there and revamp it into the 5e mechanics. It all works.
You can add all kinds of new crazy skill proficiencies, or the easy way is just call them all tools. There's already rules in 5e for tool proficiencies, right? So, just add it there, or whatever you want to do.
Or you can make your own mechanics. If a mechanic that doesn't exist or doesn't really work from another system, make your own. Now, this is a little bit more difficult because you do need to find a way to actually balance it and make sure that it works well with the rest of the system.
Yeah,
but
and any rules you make, you really want to play test and be forgiving.
Yes, be very forgiving to your players because they will not forget it.
Yeah. No, so in the first session of this sci-fi game we're talking about, I took the lasers from the Dungeon Master's Guide that do 3 dice of whatever, and I just said, okay, that's the baseline weapon. And the players had a rough night. I mean, you guys were rolling
have weapons.
super. Well, you picked up weapons.
We picked up weapons, but
but you were rolling super badly, and the bad guys were rolling super well.
This is typical for us.
Yeah, so your 3rd level characters were like getting one-shotted right and left.
Yes.
And
it needed a little bit of adjustment. And so that sort of stuff, you adjusted over time. And you perfected over time. Don't be afraid, to try things. And if they fail, it fails. It's fine. You can, if it fails really hard, you can retcon things or, just say that, the group you thought was dead had just been captured. And it's fine.
Yeah. So in between the first session where I was like, this is too much, and the second session, I was like, okay, so we're going to tweak the weapon damage down a little bit. I still want to keep it elevated to keep that.
Want guns to be dangerous, feeling. But
yeah. But maybe 3 dice is a little too much. I'll bring it down to 2 dice, etc. And the numbers are arbitrary. You want to that's something that the DMG sort of talks about in the monster creation section that I don't think really gets enough attention among dungeon masters, which is the numbers can be whatever you want them to be as the dungeon master. So
it is more like what we call guideline, the actual rules.
Yes. The D&D is not a reality simulator. D&D is barely even a fiction simulator. D&D is a game. It creates a very specific experience. So
if you want a reality simulator, I suggest trying to find a different game.
I could have, for my science fiction game, I could have said that blasters do a die 8 of damage, right? Like a bow or
it would have
worked.
It still would have worked, but it wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been as deadly or dangerous. Like we still want there to be an impact for lasers because this is sci-fi. This is not a bow. This is lasers, plasma.
Yeah, just
Whatever.
because the lasers in the DMG do 3 die 10 or whatever it is, doesn't mean that's some kind of a real number. That's something that Rodney Thompson or somebody pulled out of their ear, put into the book, right?
Right.
So don't get hung up on that stuff. Choose values for things that work for your game and that make sense to you.
Yes.
And then, like I say, play test it, run it through a few times, be willing to tweak. So let's talk about some examples of what you can do.
Yes.
We've talked about Enigma Sector a little.
Which
Enigma Sector was inspired by a game that's already been released called Aspergenesis. And I didn't want to use Aspergenesis for a couple of reasons. The biggest one was I just didn't like the setting of Aspergenesis very much. And it would have been easy enough to just say, well, we're going to use this rule set and my own setting, except that the other thing I didn't like about Aspergenesis was that it had like all the player handbook stuff renamed, right?
Okay.
And I'm like, well, if we're going to use the player handbook stuff anyway, I want to just keep the player handbook names so I don't have to keep in mind,
what is what?
This thing that they're calling a gravitic field is actually hold person or whatever,
It allows, the way that we are doing it with I almost called it Aspergenesis.
Yeah.
The way we're doing it with
Yeah.
Enigma Sector is that it still allows the players to create and mix their own things. If we want to call it something else, which I do have certain things called something else in Lux's character sheet, we can. Like, it's not setting us into a specific way of doing things, which is fine. If different settings want to do that, it's fine. But being able to create your own sci-fi campaign has really allowed you and us as players to go outside the box and try different things.
Yeah, and the question I just asked when this comes up is Jamie says I want to cast Magic Missile. And I said, great, what does that look like in this system? And he said, well, he's got his techno suit. And a little rocket launcher rises up out of my shoulder and fires a bunch of guided missiles. I was like, perfect.
Cool. Great.
Done. Go ahead, cast your Magic Missile.
We haven't touched on it yet, but when Lux begins to use enlarge or shrink, it's going to be affecting the personal gravity of someone else who is that she is affecting it on. Gravity allows your atoms to be further apart. You grow bigger.
Yep.
Closer together, you shrink.
Yep. Yeah. So the by letting the players choose, just build what they want and then tell me how it works in the system in the setting. I don't have to think of everything. That's what the people who created Aspergenesis, kudos to them. It was a big project. I don't want to sound like I'm bagging on it just because I chose to do something different. But what they did was a lot of work up front to go through and decide what everything was. And at the end of the day, it sort of becomes kind of limiting.
Basically, what you wanted was more something that was a reskin that kept the versatility of Dungeons and Dragons. Whereas with Aspergenesis, it does take away a little bit of the versatility and a little bit of the flexibility.
A little. I mean, it's great for what it is. It wasn't great for our purposes.
Right.
But some other examples. The
I'm
Adventures
not familiar with
in
any
Middle
of
Earth.
these.
Okay. Well, Adventures in Middle Earth was the I'm blanking on the name of the company now, but they had a license for Lord of the Rings, and they had released their own Lord of the Rings game.
Okay.
And it is a very nice game. Is what I would call a boutique game. It's very fancy, very expensive, high production value. And it kind of harkened back to the old Pendragon thing where you had your games took over the course of months or seasons.
Okay.
Right. Because they were replicating that long walk.
Right. The long West March.
Well, West March was a place in Middle Earth, but I know what you're getting at. So, but they had this system that was it was the available Middle Earth role playing game of the time. There have been several Middle Earth role playing games. That was the one going at the time. And that was right when 5e came out. And there were all these people who were like, I really like the One Ring. I think that was the name of the game. But I want to play 5e. And so they were like,
what can we do about this?
Yes. So they used sort of a loophole in the 30 OGL and probably some gentlemen's agreements with WotC to release Adventures in Middle-earth, which completely retooled, took the 5e engine, but completely retooled it from 1 to 20 to fit in the Middle-earth power scale. And it's an impressive feat to create a 20th level party that looks like it can fit in Middle-earth. It was. I don't know that any Adventures in Middle-earth game ever got that high. Just like it's very rare for actual D&D games to get that high.
I'm sure someone did, it's somewhere,
yeah.
but
yeah. But the fact that the system could do it and not be broken, like I say, is very impressive.
That's the important part.
Yep. And I stole parts of it for my Storm King's Thunder game, the Journeys mechanic, where
that's right, yeah.
The whole journey was kind of like the dungeon. You know, you got your long rest at safe spots, and you
I remember that.
had the encounters going on. That was pulled out of Adventures from Middle-earth. So that's an example of where you can draw inspiration for something, you can adapt things.
Yeah.
The downside of Adventures of Middle-earth is that they lost the license, and so now you have to get it, you know, at used places or wherever you can find it. But if you're interested in playing in Middle-earth, I highly recommend it. If you're interested in looking at how 5e can be tweaked, it's definitely worth looking into for that. And I put Uncanny Midnight Tales on here just as an example. Uncanny Midnight Tales was actually something I wrote. It was a retooling of the Star Wars Saga edition to play Call of Cthulhu style adventures.
Really?
Yes.
In Star Wars?
Yeah. Well, Star Wars Saga edition, you know, Star Wars Saga edition was kind of like the test bed for a lot of the 4E mechanics, right? And it was an evolution of 3rd edition. And before 5e, Saga edition was my favorite D&D variant ever. And it's I still like it quite a lot, although I think 5e is actually probably a better system overall.
Well, it's had a few years to expand upon itself.
Yeah. You know, and my big disappointment with 4e was they were talking like Saga edition was going to be, now imagine this with elves and dwarves and you've got D&D 4e, and I was like, oh yeah. And then 4e came out and it was something else entirely, but yeah. So, but I don't want to I don't want to go down that hole, but
don't go down that hole.
The point is, Saga edition is actually pretty close to 5th edition in a lot of ways. You know, it character progression worked differently and stuff like that, but it was flexible in the same way that 5e is flexible. You know, and because it was Star Wars, which has a more realistic power progression, you know, you could play more grounded sort of characters, you know.
Okay.
I mean, high level Han Solo is still not as crazy as a 5th level D&D wizard.
That's fair.
You know, so Saga edition had to be a system that could handle both high level Han Solo and high level Luke Skywalker and all these other characters, you know. And so all I did was tweak what you got at first level. You know, your typical Cthulhu investigator has a lot of like knowledge skills and things like that. They don't have a whole lot of weapon skills. So I made any kind of weapon training require a feat. You know, at first level, every character started with a feat because it was based off of 3rd edition. So if you wanted somebody who could fight, then you spent your feat on weapons proficiency. If you didn't want somebody who could fight, you'd spend your feat on something else. So,
okay.
Like I said, a lot of the examples to look to are things that WotC are putting out. You know, they they've dipped into horror, and they've dipped into sort of a quasi steampunk with Eberron and things like that. So there are some examples to work from.
Yes, I mean, like we've said, D&D is incredibly flexible.
Yep.
One of the main problems is that people look at it and assume it's high fantasy, and it is. I mean, base D&D is high fantasy.
Yeah, baseline D&D really is.
It is a box, and you can go out of that box to create what you want to. But if you really want to create something else using 5e, you can.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to. Try it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you decide after looking at it that it isn't the right thing, that's fine.
I mean, there's still a lot of different systems out there.
Yeah.
Try them.
So I think that's pretty much it for
we've hashed this out. So we are looking at some topics for next time, which knows when that will be, next couple of weeks. Okay. When I saw our notes today, I saw a question mark here on this first one. So I went ahead and wrote down, what do you do when you don't know what to do?
Yep. Yeah. And that's every DM has had this, I'm on tap to run next, and I got nothing. What am I going to do?
Or, when your players go this way and you expected them to go this way, I'm just like,
Yeah. And, we talked a little bit about like setting yourself up for success in our prep video, but there's a lot more we could talk about there. There's also our topics that keep not getting talked about, which are the Dungeon Master's Credo, which is sort of your guiding philosophy as a dungeon master. And then there's the discussion of magic items, the great debate,
which may become heated.
I'm not so.
We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't intend to be antagonistic about it.
I don't either, but
yeah. But we disagree on it, and
we do disagree. So, but it'd be interesting to hash out.
Yeah. So if you'd like to hear about any of those, please comment on what you would like to hear us talk about, or if there's some other topic you would like us to take on. This week this was on our minds because we've been playing Enigma Sector a lot. But
I love it.
Well, thank you. But we'd love to hear from you guys.
Yes,
and,
please tell
some of our.
We loved hearing. If you if this helps you in any way, or if you just like what we're talking about, please comment. We just appreciate you.
Yeah, yeah. Or if you'd like to see like Enigma Sector in action, I can
we can do that
on about it. So
I may be planning on doing that anyways.
So in the meantime, I would always, as we go out, I want to plug my Patreon because that's how I make my living. You can see my art, you can see my writing, you can see some of the maps that I've created for Enigma Sector there. And those I'm not going to release to the public because they've been built out of like tile sets and stuff that I bought. They're not completely original. They're just things I've assembled. But if you have a sci-fi game and you want to use them, they're there for you. So
I'd like to plug my Twitch. I do play Beat Saber every Wednesday, 8:30 p.m.
I love the
Eastern.
Beat Saber.
I play other variety games on Friday and Sunday, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. Please come by, come say hi. These are how I stay sane during the pandemic. And who knows, maybe it'll turn into something else in the future.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll be I'm starting to do art streams on Twitch, and I'm going to be playing the Jedi Fallen Order. I did really one. Cool. I did one last week and kind of made a hash of it. So I'm going to restart that probably tomorrow. So we'll see how that goes. But as always, it's YouTube. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell, tell the algorithm that you love us so that we get recommended to other people and all that jazz. And even just, share the links around. Tell everybody that you know who you think might like this. And we'll be happy to see you next time. We love you guys. So
stay frosty.
Now, do you want to be the guy who wants the cutthroat power politics, or you want to be the everybody's a bard guy?
Everybody's a bard.
Okay.
I could see you actually wanting the cutthroat power politics.
I played a Musketeers game that was kind of like that. It was a very cool game. It was actually run by Phil Brucato. But anyway.